Hi, welcome to what I'm reading now, Live with Purpose. In this podcast, we will explore and examine various thought-provoking books to identify their content's deep meaning and purposes, transferring them into practical applications for everyday living. Welcome. This month's book is entitled Digital Madness: How Social Media is Driving Our Mental Health Crisis and How to Restore Our Sanity by Nicholas Kardaras, PhD, written in 2022. So I want to share a very cogent, compelling quote from the book. To begin with, you become who you're with suggests that traits are not so much genetically caused as to a great extent environmentally influenced. Your environment really does make a difference. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first part is entitled The World Gone Mad. The second part is entitled Digital Dystopia. And the third part is entitled The Ancient Cure. This review will end with practical suggestions for detoxing from toxic technology. The premise of this book is that as hunter-gatherers, our psychological needs are that we are hardwired for face-to-face community, genetically designed to be physically active, and psychologically primed to seek meaning. These are how we are hardwired. He begins the book, first section, by discussing a new training that the Department of Defense mental health providers had to assess and treat video game addiction. And listen to what happened. Gaming addiction is so severe in the military that there have been several documented shocking cases of military babies dying in their cribs from parental neglect as their fathers played marathon video games sessions. The problem became so significant that the Department of Defense had to create a new cause of death for the infant death certificate entitled Death Due to Electronic Distraction. This is so sad what's happening. In the chapter entitled Addicted to the Matrix, he cites the work of Dr. Alexander Drew, which demonstrates that addiction resulted more from a toxic environment, going back to our quote, that includes isolation and lack of community, than from the substance itself. So the research that this doctor found was that people are motivated not so much for the substance, but because there's lacking something in their environment. So let's look at the importance of a healthy environment. In the 1970s, Dr. Bruce Alexander conducted his legendary rat park experiments, which proved that it's an unbearably reality or environment that drives addiction, not necessarily the addictive substance. To test his hypothesis, he revised the rat park study and created a rat park utopia, where rats were free to roam, frolic, and socialize with other rats. They had wheels to play with and to exercise, cheese to eat, and partners to engage with. They also had free and unfettered access to drug water, the same high-octane water that the ants in the control group, alone in cages, also had access to. Guess what happened? None of the rats in the rat park became hooked on the drug water, and none died. Some sampled the drug water, but they didn't like it and avoided it afterward. Who needs drug water, they said. They had friends and open spaces to play in. It was heaven on earth for rats. As for the lonely rats trapped in cages, they all died from an overdose. The critically important conclusion that Dr. Alexander drew was that escapist addiction resulted more from a toxic environment, including isolation and lack of community, than from the substance itself. Once again, it's not the substance that drives addiction, it's what's happening in someone's environment. According to Alexander, the view of addiction from the rat park is that today's flood of addiction is occurring because of our hyper-individualistic, complex, competitive, frantic, crisis-ridden society makes most people feel socially and culturally isolated. They find temporary relief to addiction to drugs or any of 1,000 other habits and pursuits because addiction allows them to escape from their feelings, to deaden their senses, and to experience an addictive lifestyle as a substitute for a whole life. So this is what's driving these addictions. The question the author asks is, does our current high-tech world breed the hyper-individualistic, hyper-competitive, frantic, crisis-ridden society that Alexander says is driven by addiction? He goes on to cite that lonely people who feel trapped, lacking a strong sense of cultural identity or a supportive sense of community, who are then exposed to highly dopamine substances or experiences, can become prey to addictive escapism. People feel trapped in their lot in life, like those rats in the Skinner cages, and are more likely to push the morphine lever, which then in turn perpetuates their cage and addictive disempowerment. He asserts that the newest opiate to exert social control, lulling and numbing people into a digital dream world, is digital heroin, a sort of societal sedation as conformity. In another chapter entitled A World Gone Mad, he discusses that the digital age has given us more innovative phones, but dumber people. He cites several studies showing how our memory, cognitive understanding, physical health, and fitness all suffer from a sedentary and tech-enabled lifestyle. Beyond obesity and diabetes, we have skyrocketing rates of heart disease, also driven by sedentary lifestyles and unhealthy diets. He cites research demonstrating that many young people are dying from a phenomenon which he calls modern depths of despair. Some of this despair is economic and a byproduct of hopelessness over the lack of meaningful, full employment. But it also seems to be more than just those circumstances. Statistics show that millennials are suffering from a loneliness epidemic. 1 in 5 millennials have 0 friends and describe feeling lost and empty. They've developed a dopamine tolerance and need higher and higher doses to feel something. He expounds on how chronic exposure to addictive substances or behaviors reduces gray matter in the brain's prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making braking system associated with impulse control. When a person engages in constant chronic screen time, and this is so true, this in turn compromises a person's ability to not engage in the addictive substance or behavior. So you get addicted to those screens. He asserts that the more passive and screen staring you engage in, the more depressed you become. And this is so true. The research is showing such high rocketing rates of depression. Addictive behaviors lower a person's dopamine baseline and other neurotransmitters, such as endorphins and norepinephrine, thus causing you to get hooked on increasing these neurotransmitter levels. So the more you're watching, you're on screens, the lower your dopamine level, which means you need more time to increase that dopamine level and all of these other neurotransmitters. In the digital age, he says, we've all become tech-dependent to some degree. This tech dependence has primed us for addiction of all sorts and transformed us into weakened, sick, addicted, hungry ghosts, pitiable creatures. And these are his words. So let's look at the drawbacks of a sedentary lifestyle, which can happen if you're just in your house and on your screens all day. Several studies show that a more sedentary, tech-enabled lifestyle can affect memory, understanding, physical health, and fitness. Sedentary living has been proven to be a significant driver of depression, and there's so much in this book about depression. These behaviors leave a person feeling understimulated as they experience inevitable dopamine crash and depression, boredom, and emptiness, where they can experience no feelings. And this is so true. It's happening. Psychologists have known for decades that the best non-pharmacological antidepressant is physical activity, such as walking, riding a bike, jogging, or playing a sport. Anything that gets the body moving also increases serotonin levels and helps oxygenate the brain. So it's really good for you in terms of your brain health to get out and exercise. This research clearly shows a link between increased screen time and ADHD as well. So once again, this book is comprehensive in terms of looking at what's happening to the brain during the screen experience. Dr. Dmitry Kristosky asserts that children become stimulant dependent and can't focus unless perpetually overstimulated. And if you're in education, you see this. Being impulsive correlates highly with all sorts of adverse lifelong outcomes, including addiction disorders and unhealthy relationships. Key piece here. For instance, abundant peer-reviewed research connects the digital age with impulsivity via instant gratification and feedback loops of screens and high-tech living. Now, I know myself as an educator, I have noticed that children who are dopamine dependent because they're on screens all the time from spiking screen time cannot sit attentively in classrooms. They can't form hobbies, they have a difficult time with face-to-face relationships, and they don't even enjoy being outdoors. They don't enjoy the beach or park or hiking because they're not getting that overstimulation that would happen during screen times. So let's look at the importance of nature, and he discusses nature extensively in this book. This next section discusses the importance of enjoying and experiencing nature. One of the significant points in this book is that the digital age has stripped away particular critical and sustaining dynamics that once were prevalent and now no longer exist. We need experiences that nature our ability to be patient. Instead, we have Twitter. We need real hand-eye experiences. Instead, we have gaming. We need face-to-face, interpersonal social experiences. Instead, we have social media. We need nature immersive experiences. Instead, we have some pictures of nature on Instagram. According to Richard Louv, who coined the term nature deficit disorder, research demonstrates that skyrocketing emotional and psychological problems are related to the erosion of our connection with nature, which is caused in large part by our immersion in the digital world. Here he discusses that human beings are hardwired toward having genuine connection with nature, so it's so important to be outdoors. The research reports that as little as 10 minutes in a natural setting can help you feel happier and lessen the effects of both physical and mental stress. A wealth of evidence in recent years shows that being active, just sitting outside in nature, or even looking at a picture of nature, benefits your overall well-being. The research is unequivocal that all people benefit from time outdoors in nature. These psychological benefits include reduced stress, anxiety, depression, as well as improved concentration and cognitive function, pain control, and faster recovery from injuries. In addition to mental and physical benefits, the researcher Dr. Don Racco also included attitudinal benefits of greater happiness, life satisfaction, reduced aggression, and better social connections. So it's so important to find time each day to get outdoors, and especially now that it's summer, you can really take advantage of the great summer evenings. The next section discusses developing resilience. And in this book, he does talk about grit, Angela Duckworth's work on grit and perseverance, and how we really, as a society, have to and should be developing grit. He discusses increasing grit, which is a passion and sustained persistence applied toward a long-term achievement, finding meaning in a meaningless world, and developing resilience. We need to become people who are resilient. And here on the next part, he talks about depression. Like I said, it's very extensive in his research of depression. In the next chapter, he discusses depression and the connection. He looks at depression as a response to various forms of disconnection and as a depression causing toxin. In this section, he identifies 7 separate types of human disconnection that can lead to depression. So as I read these 7, see if you picture yourself in any one of these situations, any one of these depression disconnection. Number 1, disconnection from meaningful work. If you're working at a dead-end job that you hate, that gives you little sense of purpose or passion, and that offers you little control or autonomy, that's a problem, he says. Try to address that problem, looking for a different employment. Disconnection from people reflects our loneliness epidemic, where we don't share meaningful experiences with other people, and he says your cat does not count. Number 3, disconnection from meaningful values, letting shallow and materialistic so-called influencers and popular culture shape our society's values so that they are based on materialism and extrinsic rewards rather than intrinsic value. Number 4, disconnection caused by childhood trauma. Trauma does lead to mental health issues. The traumatic experience you go through as a child significantly increases the likelihood of a later diagnosis of depression, so they are linked. Disconnection number 5, from respect. The compromised self-concept and dignity of people in dehumanizing and oppressive systems can and do lead to depression. Number 6, disconnection from the natural world. As we profoundly need connection to nature and the natural world and become very unwell when we are removed from contact with the natural world. And we saw that during COVID when we had those lockdowns and how many people got sick and how many people became suicidal. There was such a spike in overdoses. It's so important to be able to be free, to be outdoors, and to be in community. Number 7, disconnection from loss of hope for a better future. When a person cannot see a hopeful path forward in their lives, they can develop feelings of learned helplessness, and depression. In this section, he also discusses the work of the University of Kansas, Dr. Stephen Ilardi, the psychologist, researcher, and the author of The Depression Cure, who discovered that non-technological indigenous people were much healthier from a mental health standpoint. Indeed, he found that in these so-called primitive cultures, they had 0 rates of depression. Imagine that. No iPhones, yet not a single member of the over 2,000 locals in a tribe who were studied show signs of clinical depression. And this is true if you look at other countries, like, for example, in Africa, they don't have the mental health crisis that we have. And if you look at their culture and their society, they're very community-oriented. They do everything together. It's just pretty amazing. Here he highlights another thing you can do to address depression. He calls it the therapeutic lifestyle change. Others call it the caveman therapy. They include getting regular daily exercise, being involved in social activity where social connections are made, eating an omega-3 rich diet, getting plenty of natural sunlight, getting ample sleep every night, and participating in meaningful tasks that leave little time for negative thoughts. All things our ancestors had in abundance. He notes in this section that the benefits of this more primitive lifestyle, having a depressed person live a more back-to-basics type of lifestyle, that their depression disappears. The 3 key ingredients of this antidepressant TLC therapeutic lifestyle change protocol are more physical activity a sense of community, and meaningful tasks, finding something meaningful to do. In this section, he also includes a section on increasing positive stabilizing factors. And what are those? What are positive stabilizing factors? And the author discusses recent and relevant research which demonstrates that the more positive stabilizing factors that people had in their lives, the more of these they had, the less likely they were to be diagnosed with depression, even if they had chronic long-term stress or an acute episode in the preceding years. So what are these healthy, positive stabilizing factors? A healthy, supportive environment rich with stabilizing factors such as a supportive friend, just having a good friend, a close family member, or a supportive partner, or work to immunize the person from getting depressed. So it's so important to have a healthy group of individuals in your life. In particular, he discusses adding healthy life extending disciplines, which include regular exercise, a sense of life purpose, stress reduction, moderate calorie intake, engagement in spiritual practice, strong family and social life, and profound spiritual faith-based communities, all which aid in reducing depression. And I know people who live this kind of lifestyle, and I do see that. I see how it benefits them. Additionally, he says depression research demonstrates that people living in the blue zones, which I'm sure you've heard of, have more substantial group and family social bonds, which essentially add to a mentally healthy psychological profile. So key, these family and social bonds. So the next section discusses the need for meaning and purpose. In this section, he cites the work of Viktor Frankl, who wrote the seminal book, Man's Search for Meaning. In his research that he discovered in the Auschwitz concentration camp, he found that the struggle for survival, to do something meaningful in your life, can hone and sharpen a sustaining, sanity-sustaining sense of purpose, which we as humans need. People need and are looking for meaningful tasks in their lives. So the people that he researched while he was in this camp, he said the people that survived, the people that lived through it, were people that had something important to do. And that's what kept them alive, something important to do when they came out. He said here, he cites that when people go on Facebook, they feel depressed after using social media because they feel that the time spent just isn't meaningful. The time lacked authentic connection and superficiality. So the last section is the ancient cure. In the final part of the book, entitled The Ancient Cure, the author describes his own personal odyssey with digital addiction and discusses beyond therapy some solutions that can be employed. So he himself struggled with this addiction. In this section, he discusses that how we frame things is critically important with regard to our mental health. That is, if we perceive or define something as being problematic, then it could become toxic or take on a more harmful features. In this section, he discusses that it's not stress that kills us, but our beliefs regarding stress that can actually make it harmful to us. He goes on to say that the reality is that stress can actually be beneficial as it builds resilience, and via the release of neural hormone oxytocin, the so-called cuddle hormone that's released during times of stress, we are propelled to reach out to other people and become more social when times are difficult. And that's true. If you're in a time of difficulty, you need friends. You want people around you. We are incredibly hardwired toward healing socialization. What we need are strong friendships and ties that can give us a sense of genuine community and support that can help us manage through life's challenges. Most people just need a good friend or two or three to be able to talk with rather than a paid therapist. And he does go into how a friend can be just as effective as a paid therapist. Other examples include a mentor or a sponsor or a priest or a rabbi or a community of friends or a trusted relative or a village elder. Here he discusses all the traditional societal foundational pillars that were safety nets for the fabric of society are altogether no longer available to people. And then he gives examples of what they are, such as the nuclear family, community organizations such as the YMCA, book clubs, community centers, 4-H clubs, Boy Scouts, religious organizations, and social societies. In this last section, he cites the work of the researcher Father Palensi, who helped 25 men living in a homeless shelter gain recovery through purpose and meaning by having the gentleman build a ship. All the men in the study were able to overcome their addictions because they had something important to do. They built a ship. This undertaking demonstrates the importance of finding a passion or a goal that is in its pursuit and its attainment can be life-altering and transformative. And then he goes on to list, the book closes with the list of ancient wellness tips. So let me go over them and share them with you. He says, start each day with a quiet, reflective, or contemplative walk. Take some time each morning to center yourself before engaging with other people. Take several minutes each evening to look at the night sky and wonder. He says, do the right thing. The Greeks believed that character mattered. It was essential to live an honest and estimable life of integrity and virtue. He says, make it a point to do a dialectic each day where you challenge your assumptions about a subject. He says, do a 5-minute music meditation each day where you listen to stringed, non-vocal music. He discusses do 30 to 40 minutes of physical exercise. He says, make it a point to have one lively and engaged in-person discussion every day with at least one other person. He talks about valuing moderation and doing something creative. And then he talks about being a mentor. So in conclusion, take a break from toxic technologies by taking a technological sabbatical. And I'd just like to give a word here to parents that you can set the example by putting timers on your phone and timers on your children's phones and helping your children develop their hobbies and helping them to find out what they're good about, what they're passionate about, and getting them outdoors. So once again, I hope you enjoyed the purpose of this podcast, which was to share unconventional ideas, information, and research. I hope you implement some of these recommendations and suggestions. I know it was helpful for me as I was reading it to be reminded of the small disciplines that I can include in my everyday life. I hope to see you next month as we listen to what I'm reading now, Live with Purpose. Thanks for joining me.